Hey everyone, it's Laura here from makingcardsisfun.com. It's time for another Saturday Stamp Day card video. Today I'm going to be using the brand new Carnival Cupcakes stamp set and die cut set from Mama Elephant. This is just such an adorable stamp set, and I'm going to be using the small images to create a background, and I'm going to use one of the bigger critters as the focal point of the card. Starting out with a piece of white watercolor cardstock. This measures 4 1/4 by 4 1/4, and I drew some squares that measure 3 1/4 by 3 1/4. I'm going to be using the tiny sheep to create a background. You can also use the other critters, but this time I'm going to use the sheep because it kind of reminds me of my dog Ginny. Now I'm using some kitchen flour instead of a powder tool or a powder bag. Just doing that to prep my cardstock before I'm going to do some heat embossing. Okay, so now I'm going to... So I really like that I have these grid lines to just as a guide to stamp the sheep image. I'm using Versamark ink to stamp the sheep since I'm going to do some heat embossing. And as you can see, I can perfectly line that up with the grid, so it's just super easy to create a background. So I completely stamped the whole background using the sheep image. Now I'm going to sprinkle the ink using some opaque bright white embossing powder from Wow. This is a super fine embossing powder, but the regular also works fine. But if you would like to emboss like very delicate images like the sheep image, then I would recommend using the fine embossing powder. So I'm going to grab my tweezers just to hold the piece so that I don't burn my fingers, and then I'm going to use my heat gun to melt the embossing powder. Erasing those pencil marks we made earlier. I'm just using a regular eraser, and I'm trying to be careful so that I don't damage the embossing powder. I'm going to be using the Kuretake Gansai 36 watercolor set to create this magnificent watercolor background. I discovered a really fun and fast technique to create a whole watercolor background. Now I'm going to be talking more about this watercolor set in my upcoming August 2014 favorites video. So I'm going to be talking about the quality of the paint, the colors, also going to compare it to other watercolors. So stay tuned for that. But for now I'm going to be making a background using this beautiful set. So I'm just going to take out the colors that I'm going to be using. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to use my paintbrush and a bunch of water just to add water to my paper. And I do this always just before I start creating a watercolor background. By the way, I'm using the Canson watercolor paper. It is super heavyweight and it absorbs so much water. It's really like my favorite watercolor paper. Okay, so first I'm going to add the pink color. Going to add it over here. Then I'm going to use the orange. And then last but not least, the yellow. Okay, so I also want this background to be like very shiny and glittery. So that's why I'm going to use the pearlescent color. So this is basically just a colorless paint, but it has this beautiful sparkle to it. It's almost like Perfect Pearls or Wink of Stella, but then in like a watercolor. So I'm just going to add it underneath all the color that I added earlier. So I'm just adding a row of glitter. There we go. Now I'm going to add some paint splatter, some water splatters, just some drops of water. Okay, and now I'm going to use a clean baby wipe. So this is super clean. It is also still very wet. And I'm just going to slide it down. But now I'm going to add more color. And you'll see that the second layer does the trick. So I'm just adding more of that color. And it's a little bit less wet than before, so now you will end up with more vibrant colors. Now I'm using that same baby wipe, and I'm just going to, need to add some splatters first. Okay, now I'm going to use that baby wipe. And I'm just sliding it down, just like this, and you kind of mix the colors together, and it's totally okay. Color background is drying, and in the meantime I'm going to color the adorable sheep from the same stamp set from Mama Elephant. This is a Carnival Cupcake stamp set. Going to stamp the sheep using archival jet black ink. This is just a really great waterproof ink that you can use for watercoloring. So I'm just going to ink up my stamp, and I'm going to stamp it on the watercolor cardstock. This is the same watercolor paper from Canson. So I stamped over this image using Versamark ink, and I heat embossed it using some clear embossing powder from Wow. So now I'm going to be doing some coloring, and I'm going to be using distress markers. So I'm going to use pumice stone first. Just going to scribble this down onto my work surface. You can also scribble it on an acrylic block if you would like to. And I'm using my Pentel Aquash brush to color this image. I'm using the medium tip. So first I'm adding water to the image to get the colors blend easily. Just going around the edges of the sheep to give it some dimension. There we go. So for the sheep's face, I'm going to be using Carrot Rose. Going to use the coordinating die cut to die cut the sheep. So I stamped the little bear and also the bunny from the stamp set on some watercolor paper, and I colored these both using distress markers. So I did the same technique as the sheep, so that's why I didn't show it on camera. So I used tea dye for the fur of the animals, and I also used dried marigold and tattered rose for the nose and for the inside of the ears and paws. So I'm going to use a tiny strip of white cardstock and the Bubble Talk stamp set from Winnie and Walter for the greeting. I'm going to stamp "It's Your Birthday." So I just cut this cute fishtail. Okie dokie, so I'm going to adhere the fishtail banner and the animals onto the card using some foam adhesive. I'm just going to use these big squares, but I'm going to cut them in two so they are a tiny bit smaller. I'm also going to adhere the animals using the same foam adhesive. Good. I'm quickly going to adhere some Pretty Pink Posh sequins. I'm using the 4mm and 6mm Pink Peony sequins, the 4mm and 6mm Tangerine sequins. I'm also using the 8mm and 4mm Sparkling Clear sequins. And then last but not least, I'm using the 4mm and 6mm Lemon Yellow sequins. So those are a bunch of sequins, and these are actually my favorite sequins. I like to combine these together just because the color scheme is so fun and happy. So that finishes up the card for this week's Saturday Stamp Day card and video. I really like the sheep background and how sparkly it looks in real life. The sequins are also a fun detail, and then of course these cute critters just make my heart happy. So thank you so much for watching. All the supplies I used are linked below. I linked to Simon Says Stamp and to Ellen Hutson just so you can see for yourself at which store you would like to purchase these items. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back next week. Bye!